Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode of Season 9 of ECCB Connects. We kick off the season by speaking with Allister Hodge, Senior Economist in the Research Department, about the importance of household debt. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
It's coming!
It's coming!
It's coming!
It's coming!
It's coming!
It's coming!
Allister, welcome to ECCB Connects.
Thank you for having me.
Allister, we're at the start of a brand new year, and we know for some people the new year brings a different set of challenges because of the indulgences over the season, excessive spending, and some of this spending is usually by cash, some loans. So we're going to look at household debt. How is household debt classified?
Well, in general, we can think about household debt as any sort of obligation which requires households to make principal and interest payments on a set schedule to either a financial institution or a non-financial institution. And so that would be broadly classified as mortgage loans, automobile loans, student loans, and other types of consumer debt. Within that class of consumer debt, we'd have things like credit card loans, the hire purchase loans. And hire purchase loans, let me give an example of this. You go to a department store and you acquire some items on, hire purchase, and out of the hire purchase, you may have to make weekly payments or monthly payments. And that's what we consider as, hire purchase consumer type debt.
What is the relationship between household debt and the economy of our ECCU countries?
In general, there is a positive relationship between household debt and economic growth in the ECCU. So, for example, households are required to undertake debt to acquire big ticket items, things like purchase of a house, construction of a house, automobile loans. You want to go to university to study, you have to take out a loan. Or even, smaller type items. So you need to purchase a refrigerator, you don't have the cash up front, so you have to take out loans. So in so doing, we generally have a positive relationship between economic growth and household debt, since the acquisition of the debt allows consumption to take place in the economy. And of course, when you have a house, for example, you have to buy things to put into the house. Likewise, if you have an automobile, you have to take care of the automobile, you have to fill it up with gas, etc.
So that helps. Spending stimulates the economy.
Indeed,
activities.
Yes, yes, that spending stimulates the economy. So it helps to propel both consumption spending and investment spending. Investment spending being on the household side, whereby households construct houses and so forth.
What has been the trend with respect to household debt in the ECCU, let's say for the past 5 years?
Immediately past the crisis, there was a drop in household indebtedness, and it has picked up in the last 3 or so years. In terms of growth, in terms of the acquisition of debt by households.
When we hear about debt, I know, debt is not necessarily negative or bad. We hear about government debt, and, government has to have debt for projects for the country to grow. So at what point does household debt become an issue of concern?
Well, when household debt becomes an issue of concern is generally when the ability of households to service that debt becomes threatened. So, for example, you usually hear economists refer to things like the debt service ratios, which is basically the amount of payments on debt that households have to make relative to their disposable income. Disposable income being a very important factor here, since it is your income that is left over after taxes have been deducted out of your salary. So that's what you have left over for spending. We traditionally look at that metric in terms of assessing when household debt is becoming unsustainable. Now, there's no set threshold for that. So, for example, some households may be able to carry a debt service ratio of, let's say, 30%. Some households can only carry a debt service ratio of 15%. But it's definitely at a point when we realize that households are having difficulty servicing their debt.
And if you have this happening over a period of time, what sort of impact will that have on the economy?
Well, that is definitely a negative impact on the economy. And that impact resonates not only through the decision that a household has to make in terms of whether they service their debt or they reduce their spending, both of which are bad for the economy. So if households choose to default on their debt, that ultimately affects financial institutions within the country, and that can lead to a slowdown in the economy. Likewise, if they choose to service their debt and reduce their spending, that also hurts the economy, because as households reduce their spending, businesses make less money, they have to lay off persons, and in so doing, that further slows down the economy, and that leads to basically a spiraling effect in the economy.
Allister, the ECCB conducts several analysis of the economic activity of the ECCU member countries. Where would household debt factor in?
Well, we traditionally monitor household debt via the Financial Stability Report, which we recently started doing sometime back in 2016. So that has become a premier focus of that report.
And what's the importance of this report?
The importance of monitoring household debt relates back to the effects that it can have on the broader economy and the stability of the financial sector, especially when households become distressed and they are unable to service their debts adequately. So financial stability reports have become almost a benchmark of almost every major central bank across the world since the global financial crisis. Now, the genesis to the global financial crisis was really due to high levels of household debt. So for example, in the United States, you'd hear them use terms like subprime borrowers. Now, subprime borrowers are people who are borderline in terms of their debt quality or their ability to service their debt. So this is a metric that's commonly monitored globally, and we here at the ECCB now are monitoring it closely to ensure that debt does not get out of hand, and hence the reason why we report on it in our financial stability report.
So it's not just what's happening in your family, in your household, it has a bigger impact.
Yes, it's in general for the entire economy. So not only for that household, but also for the banks, for the institutions that are doing the lending to households, as well as businesses, etc.
So this really calls for individuals to be careful. We mentioned that debt, while it's not necessarily negative or bad, there comes a point where it becomes an issue of concern. And so at this point, households need to be careful as to how they go about acquiring debt and managing debt.
Indeed, it is something that households have to manage carefully to ensure that they can adequately service this debt on time so that they don't fall into default. Other things that they should think about would include, what are the terms of the loan, what's the interest rate, the repayment schedule, and so forth. So all of this boils down to basically a budgeting management issue.
Allister, as we wrap up, what final words do you have to say as an economist to the people of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union with respect to household debt?
Yes, it's important for households to manage their finances adequately so that we can have a sound financial system and robust economic growth within the ECCU.
Allister, thank you very much for speaking with us on ECCB Connects.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming.
It's coming!
To view any episode of ECCB Connects anytime, any place, at your convenience, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn at ECCB Connects. And now, this week's financial tip.
Emergencies happen when you least expect them. Put something aside to cover the unexpected. Aim to have at least 3 months' salary set aside for emergencies.
We've come to the end of this week's episode of ECCB Connects. Remember, ECCB Connects is produced by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to share with you who we are, what we do, and how we serve you. Join us again next week for another program.